Today, I'm going to tell you a story written right here about a man we'll call Frank. And this story about a high-earning 70-year-old will highlight the extreme importance of financial planning, especially when it comes to retirement. As I recap Frank's story, it will become very apparent that regardless of income level, the lack of proper planning can doom a man to a retirement filled with scarcity, unneeded burden, and regret. When I asked Frank if sharing his story would be okay, he told me that he knew people might ridicule him, and that to him, that's a price that he's willing to pay if his story helps wake up even just one person. So, with that said, let's get started. Frank's story starts in the early 80s. Frank at the time was a mid-20-something-year-old, and at first, it seemed like Frank was going to end up as a drifter. He had never been called to fight in the Vietnam War, but instead of taking advantage of this and maybe going to college, Frank, honestly, for lack of a better term, wasted his early 20s, doing odd jobs here and there, living by the beach, and while having lots of fun, not really building or starting any sort of career or path. But that all changed in 1981, when Frank got his on-again, off-again girlfriend pregnant. And at first, for Frank, this seemed like an absolute disaster. He could barely take care of himself. He didn't really have a stable place where he was living, and he wasn't even really sure if this relationship with his girlfriend was going to work out. He was frustrated because it seemed like his carefree lifestyle had just come to an end. But little did he know, this unexpected pregnancy and future son would change his life completely, and for the better. And that is due to a conversation he had with his own father when he broke the news to his own dad, John, that he also was going to be a father. John honestly let him have it. He told him he was a waste, he was careless, and that his irresponsible lifestyle was the exact reason this happened in the first place. And John told him that if he wanted to continue being considered his son, that Frank also would get his act together immediately, and that he would take care of his future child, as a father damn well should. John told him that once the baby was born, he could move back in with him on one condition: that over the next 9 months, Frank would figure out what he wanted to do with his life in order to provide for his future son. And Frank agreed, mostly because he didn't have another choice. And also because, although he thought that his own dad was pretty uptight, he did love him, and he did respect him. Now, out of the respect for time, let's just say that over those next 9 months, Frank dove headfirst and learned everything there was to learn about plumbing. It wasn't a glorious job, and it wasn't a fun job, at least not to him, but he knew that it most likely would be a stable one. And again, for the sake of time, and to get to the actual reason for this story, simply put, over the next 40 years, Frank had an absolutely amazing run. He eventually became a fully licensed plumber. He spent the first 10 years of his career working under a company, and then after building a solid client base, he spent the next 30 years self-employed. And while he never really developed his skill into a business with other employees and plumbers under him, what he did do was make more, sometimes way more, than the average income virtually every single year following that fateful conversation with his father. And because of that, he was able to give his own son, Greg, the life he deserved. The thing is, though, Frank's carefree spirit never went away. In fact, it was only enhanced by now having a job that provided him with good money, and as his son grew older, by having a best friend to make new memories with. And that is exactly what Frank did. As Greg grew up, his father's love for him grew stronger. Frank spent more and more time with his son. He bought him toys, new clothes, and eventually sports equipment, and being the 90s, the newest retro video games. And in the meantime, Frank also bought himself quite a lot. Frank had always had a huge love for cars. It was definitely a passion of his, and he liked to joke that in another life, he probably should have been a mechanic, but he wasn't. So instead, every few years, he always splurged on the newest sports car that would sit right next to the newest, biggest, and baddest work truck. And Frank also loved food, and being a single dad, very busy with work, he didn't really eat at home very much. Instead, he and his son would try new restaurants or go to their favorite spots almost every single day of the week that Greg wasn't at his mom's. And one other major expense: vacations. Frank was self-employed, and he had some very loyal clients, both who owned personal property and multi-family units. So Frank mostly worked on his schedule when he wanted to. And when he wasn't working or messing with his cars in the garage, he was traveling, sometimes with his son and sometimes without, especially as Greg grew older. Frank also loved sports. So a lot of the times when he was traveling to a big game, staying in a nice hotel, and enjoying the week before or after the event. The point I'm trying to highlight with all of this is that he was making well above average income, but he was also spending lots and lots of money every single year. And because he was self-employed, besides the Social Security, there was no one really there to talk to him about or force him to invest for his future. So unless you consider cars and restaurants investments, Frank was unknowingly setting in motion every single day events that would change his standard of living completely when he needed it most: in his retirement. During his very fruitful 40-year career in plumbing, almost none of his income went to retirement savings or investments. And just to put that into perspective, over a 40-year period, investing even just $200 per month can turn into well over $1 million by retirement. And $300 a month will put you damn near $2 million bucks. These are both numbers that Frank could have absolutely afforded, probably without changing his lifestyle very much at all. And just to put it into further perspective, most experts are going to advise that at least 10%, if not 15% of your pre-tax income should be saved or invested for retirement. Frank was doing none of this. He wasn't investing $200 or $300 per month, and he sure as hell was not investing at least 10% of his income. The only saving grace was the one single investment that he did make, although he probably didn't even see it as an investment at the time, and that was his home that he purchased in the late 90s. Because purchasing a home is a smart and prudent idea, right? No, because the townhome that he was renting before only had a one-car garage, and he loved cars, so he wanted a bigger space to work on them. My goodness. Regardless, he did buy a house, which ended up honestly probably being the only investment he ever made. Retirement was sudden and unexpected for Frank. At the age of 67, just a few years ago from today, Frank was once again working on his sports car. At this point, a very nice first-year C8 Corvette. He had the car up on a jack, and he was fiddling with the underside when his career as a plumber came to a painful end. The jack he was using, for some reason, gave out and sent the car downward onto him. Luckily, being a car nut, he knew to put a jack stand, but not so luckily, because of the position that he was in under the car, the few inches that the car did come down due to the jack not being properly positioned was just enough to put extreme pressure at just the wrong angle to irreparably injure his lower back. With the adrenaline pumping through his veins, Frank was able to pull himself from underneath the vehicle. But it was clear in the coming weeks, with confirmation from his doctor, that at his age, due to his injury, continuing his work as a plumber was all but guaranteed not to happen. In the following 3 years that took Frank from that moment to today, at 70 years old, it became very apparent that he did not have enough money to sustain his lifestyle. In fact, the lack of planning for retirement and the lack of investing meant that he didn't have enough money to sustain an even much more basic lifestyle for more than a couple of years. I asked Frank where he was financially today, and he told me that he probably has just 10,000 bucks or so left in the bank. He also said that he had to sell his Corvette as he couldn't afford the payments anymore. He said he hasn't done any plumbing work since the accident, and that his back, while much better now, still gives him immense pain when bending down or sitting for too long. I asked him how he planned to continue living, as he was still in relatively good health and could live another 10 or 20 years easily. He told me his saving grace, his home. It'll be paid off in just a couple of years, and it's now worth a little over $500,000. I asked him how he had been making the mortgage payments on it without a job and with very little savings. He laughed and he told me that his mortgage from the early 90s was peanuts compared to mortgages nowadays. But he said that even that was hard to swing with very little savings and no income. So he took his Social Security early. You're allowed to start receiving Social Security at 62, but if you wait until 70, you get a much higher benefit. He said he was initially planning on doing this, but because of the circumstances, he started receiving his benefits at 67, the year of the accident. I asked him if, when he said his home was his saving grace, if that meant he was going to sell it. He looked down, saddened by the idea, and told me yes. He said he had a lot of good memories in that house, and it was going to hurt to have to let it go. But luckily for him, he had raised a good son, in his 40s now, established in his career, who told him to come live with him and his wife in their guest house. And all Greg asked in return was a very small monthly rent to help cover the mortgage, since he initially planned to rent out that guest house. Frank says he's very thankful for his son, and he's very thankful for his stupid love for cars that made him make the only investment he ever did. Because without that home, he'd have nothing. I asked him if he could leave one message for those younger than him. What would it be? He simply said, "Don't wait. Start planning for your future now. Your retirement will show up faster than you'd think. And sometimes it shows up uninvited. And it will show up, whether you're prepared or whether you're not."